Her portrait is plastered on signs across several states, with over $1 million available for anyone who chooses honesty over a secret. People are still in her corner, and the case, despite the passing weeks and the chilling silence, hasn't stalled or been shoved into a drawer, nor has it been quietly moved into the pile of cold mysteries that nobody really thinks will ever be cracked. This file is active. The wheels are turning even when the progress isn't visible to those of us watching from the outside. Laboratory analysis is ongoing. Every lead is being tracked down. The heat on those with answers is intensifying behind the scenes. That's how it goes in these cases until the dam finally breaks. So this evening, we aren't finishing with a recap or some neat little bow that ties up the facts and makes everyone feel like they've got the whole picture figured out. We're ending with the core mystery that has defined this from the start. The real question hiding behind those ransom notes, the question guarded by the sheriff's strategic silence. The one Harry Troas hinted at when he suggested this could be about vengeance or rage, something far beyond our current grasp. For weeks, everyone wondered what these kidnappers were after, but perhaps that was the wrong way to look at it. Maybe those notes weren't a plea for cash. Maybe they were a camouflage. And perhaps the real query, the one that brings Nancy home and the one that reveals the truth, the one that someone out there can already answer, isn't about what they wanted. It's about what they were trying to bury. If you know anything regarding Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts, please reach out to the Pima County Sheriff or the federal tip line. A bounty exceeding $1 million remains unclaimed. NY's kin still hold out for answers. Somewhere, the real story stays buried. It has been almost 50 days since Savannah Guthrie's mother vanished, and that suspected kidnapping remains a total mystery tonight. However, we have just confirmed that investigators have pulled even more footage from Nancy Guthrie's home security system. New video clips were collected over the past few weeks from various cameras installed around Nancy Guthrie's Tucson residence. One particular lens was attached to a perimeter fence, monitoring the rear of the property and the entire swimming pool area. A second camera captured the entire driveway and the area directly in front of the garage door. This new footage showed family, gardeners, and pool cleaners from weeks before the incident, but nothing that set off any alarms. 7 weeks into the search for Guthrie and her captors, that single doorbell video remains our only glimpse of the perpetrator. Wait, for several weeks, this whole case seemed to tell a very basic and straightforward story. An 84-year-old grandmother disappears from her bedroom late at night, and then those bizarre letters begin to arrive. The demands were for millions of dollars, leading nearly everyone who heard about it to assume the exact same thing. That theory made total sense. It was a familiar trope that most people bought into from the very start. But tonight, every single assumption you had about the Nancy Guthrie case is about to be completely shattered. Because a veteran who spent his life at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a man who knows these cases intimately, is suggesting that the ransom theory is looking more doubtful with every single day that passes without a lead. And that is not even the most disturbing part of this entire story. The sheriff leading the task force, whose team has been on this since Nancy first vanished, just shared something truly shocking. He stated that his team of investigators believes they already understand exactly why Nancy's home was targeted. They think they know why this specific house and this specific woman were picked, but he is keeping that motive secret. Just consider that. Law enforcement claims to have the why, but they are choosing to remain completely silent. So tonight, the central mystery is no longer just about who actually walked off with Nancy Guthrie. The question is whether money was ever the true motivation, and if it wasn't, what were the people behind this actually after? And why is the answer so incredibly sensitive that investigators are refusing to even speak it out loud? To grasp why this shift is so significant, you have to go back to the very first day. You must understand what the public was told and why nearly everyone following the case reached the same conclusion on January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old woman, had spent that final evening enjoying time with her family. There was absolutely nothing unusual or alarming about that evening. It was just a typical night with family before they dropped her off at her quiet home in the Catalina Foothills area. They said their goodbyes, watched her go inside, and then drove away. That was the last time they saw her. The following morning, Nancy was scheduled to show up for a social gathering at her local church. She was the type of person who always showed up. She was incredibly reliable and consistent. When she never appeared, the friends waiting for her didn't just shrug it off. They knew immediately that something was very wrong. By the time authorities arrived at Nancy's residence, she was gone. But not like she had just stepped out. She was gone in that heavy way that makes your heart sink, signaling that something terrible happened inside. Detectives stated they believed she had been taken from her home against her will. And then the ransom demands arrived. Usually, when people hear that, their minds automatically fill in the rest of the story. Someone grabbed her because they want cash. Just pay them and bring her back home. It feels like a business transaction, cold and awful, yes, but at least there is a clear logic. At the very least, you can look at the situation and feel like you understand the motive. That is exactly how the public viewed this case once they heard about the $1 million demands. People read those reports and assume the crime was fueled by simple greed. They figured someone spotted a wealthy senior in a nice area and decided she was more valuable as a hostage than a neighbor. A reward was posted, the feds got involved, and the public waited for the typical negotiations to begin. Everyone expected that money would be discussed and that Nancy would eventually be returned to her family. But as the weeks dragged on, there was still no sign of Nancy Guthrie coming home. Now, the professional investigators who study these cases are starting to suggest a perspective that changes the entire foundation of the story. That initial story might not be the truth at all. Every high-profile investigation eventually hits a specific turning point where the public's perception suddenly pivots because of one solitary insight shared softly by a seasoned pro hits with more force than all the noise that filled the airwaves before. You suddenly find yourself leaning in closer, your mind racing as you wonder, wait, did I actually hear that right? That exact feeling surfaced in the Nancy Guthrie mystery when Harry Trumbitis finally weighed in. He is no mere pundit. He is not just another talking head offering empty theories. This man dedicated a career to serving as a special agent within the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That agency represents the gold standard, arriving whenever a situation becomes too massive or lethal for local cops to manage on their own. This is a veteran who has stared down hardened felons, who thoroughly understands the intricate ways that major felonies are orchestrated and carried out, who spent decades mastering the art of distinguishing a staged scene from the cold, hard reality of what truly went down. When Harry Trumbitis analyzed the Guthrie disappearance, he dropped a bombshell that caught many seasoned observers completely off guard. He stated, "A payday is looking less and less like the primary driver here. Pause and process that." He did not rule it out. He chose his words precisely because elite detectives never fully dismiss a theory until the hard evidence slams that door for good. Yet, he called it highly improbable. When an expert of his caliber makes such a claim, people start paying very close attention. These insights are never tossed around lightly. They are calculated moves. When you have spent a lifetime untangling high-stakes abductions, when you grasp the inner workings of how these underworld operations function, you only make that call if the evidence is leading you toward a completely different conclusion. So, what exactly was his logic? Why would a retired federal agent examine a file containing physical ransom demands, clear written orders for millions in cash, and then begin to doubt that profit was the actual goal? It all boils down to how these professional snatches really play out on the street versus the dramatized versions we see in Hollywood films. Most folks, when envisioning a kidnapping for profit, picture something that operates very much like a high-stakes corporate transaction. A target is grabbed, a price is set, funds are moved through some elaborate, secretive handoff. The hostage returns, the culprits vanish. It feels straightforward, transactional, and almost routine. However, Trumbidas clarified that the truth is worlds away from that myth. Real-world abductions for cash are incredibly sophisticated and messy endeavors. They demand a degree of teamwork and long-term focus that most street-level gangs are simply incapable of sustaining. Consider every single detail that must go perfectly for a multi-million-dollar extortion plot to actually succeed. You need to snatch a person without leaving a trace, getting spotted, or getting busted right at the scene. You must secure a hideout to keep that individual safe and hidden from the world for a significant length of time, You are forced to send your threats through channels that keep your identity completely invisible to investigators. You have to spar with the police because the authorities are always in the loop, all while keeping your cool. Plus, you have to control the hostage. You have to babysit your own crew because every extra body increases the risk of a leak, a sudden panic, or a fatal slip-up. Then, assuming everything else goes flawlessly, you still have to secure the payout without walking straight into a massive police trap. Every one of those phases presents a massive opportunity for the entire house of cards to come crashing down. Trumbitis highlighted a crucial fact that most people ignore, though it becomes vital once you truly consider it. Abductions for money in America are actually quite rare, and their frequency has been dropping for years, not rising, but falling. This suggests that as the police have mastered the art of handling these specific crises, and as new digital tools have made staying anonymous much tougher, and as lab science has progressed, the specific type of crook who once might have tried an extortion grab has realized that the house always wins. The rare incidents that still occur usually involve a very unique set of factors. They typically pop up when a suspect has inside access, total desperation, or a delusional conviction that they can actually beat the system and vanish. Even then, the actual win rate where the perp gets the cash and stays free is much worse than you might think. So when Trumbidas reviews the Guthrie file and begins doubting the Ransom angle, he is looking at the big picture, the cold facts and data showing that successful snatches are incredibly rare, grueling, and nearly impossible to pull off in a contemporary US city where cameras are recording every single move. Electronic trails are nearly impossible to wipe clean, and the authorities now have decades of experience tackling these specific types of felony. But broad trends aren't the only thing causing him to rethink this whole situation. We should focus on what went down, or better yet, what didn't go down during this case's timeline. Typically, when a snatch and grab is strictly for cash, it follows a certain beat. Demands get tossed out. A typical tug of war kicks off. Those running the show stick around because they have no other choice. The payday is the target. You won't see a dime without steady chatter, constant bartering, and driving the deal home. This kind of hit only nets a profit if the final handoff actually happens. Yet, as the weeks dragged on for Nancy Guthrie, the idea of an active bidding war started looking pretty fuzzy. That dead air and the lack of a clear fix felt less like a tough deal and more like a different beast. It just didn't square with the normal ransom plot. Then, Sheriff Chris Nanos dropped a bombshell that basically wrecked the whole story everyone was telling. The top cop mentioned that his team thinks they've cracked why that specific residence was hit. He didn't claim to have the perp in his sights yet, even though that hunt is clearly still in full swing. He suggested they understand why this exact spot was picked, why this property, why her, why that particular evening. After that, he went stone cold silent. He wouldn't spill the motive or even whisper about where they were headed. He refused to hand over any part of the puzzle that his detectives seemed to have already solved. All he did was verify there's a real motive. This wasn't some fluke or a lucky break for a random crook. Then he just cut it off. Now, consider how that stacks up against the insights shared by the former agent. An ex-Fed is now claiming that the whole ransom theory is starting to look like a long shot. The lead sheriff says they've figured out why that house was tagged. Neither of these guys is calling this a roll of the dice. Neither professional is acting like the why behind this is still some big mystery. They're both dropping heavy hints, very carefully, that there's a pinpointed reason Nancy Guthrie was in the crosshairs. It's a concrete motive that the cops seem to get, and it's definitely not what the neighbors have been guessing. Look, if this were just a plain old cash grab targeting a rich senior in a fancy zip code, there'd be no point in the sheriff being so tight-lipped about why the place was hit. Greed usually doesn't need that much tiptoeing. There is zero reason to hide the specifics of a money-driven heist from the evening news, but it's a different story when you're guarding a motive that's deeply personal and very precise, and maybe tied to certain individuals or situations the department is still trying to get a handle on. The simple fact the sheriff admitted there's a motive but wouldn't spill, it says plenty. That choice to keep us in the dark while everyone wants the truth speaks volumes. Whatever the reason for picking Nancy, it's clearly so touchy that a public leak might blow the whole case. And honestly, that just doesn't fit the profile of a standard ransom play. That looks like something far more tangled, way more intimate, and significantly more chilling. The story the community bought into isn't the one the detectives are actually chasing down. And from this point forward, every scrap of proof and every tiny detail, every move the bad guys made starts looking totally different once you realize those ransom letters might have been a total sideshow. They could have been a smokescreen. There's a world of difference between a spur-of-the-moment act and something built from the ground up. Quick hits are messy and rash. They leave a trail of breadcrumbs going everywhere because the person responsible wasn't thinking straight, didn't bother with a solid plan, and certainly wasn't bracing for the heat that would come later. Those hits are definitely terrifying, but they always have this chaotic vibe to them. A stray thumbprint, a neighbor who caught a glimpse, a cell phone pinging at exactly the wrong time. Winging it usually leaves a mess all over the place. But a scripted crime is different. It has a very specific kind of silence to it. The clutter is managed. The clock is watched. Those weird little details that don't fit, those aren't blunders. Those are calculated moves. And when the pros start peeling back the layers, they don't find a mess. They find a clear plan. If you map out the facts in the Nancy Guthrie investigation and view them as more than just a pile of scary coincidences, but as a string of deliberate actions by a prepared actor, you get a vision of something far more calculated and way less random. Each individual bit of proof might seem easy enough to brush off by itself, but when you stack them up and see them as choices instead of luck, the narrative becomes impossible to ignore. Let's look at the entrance. Detectives found a masked figure on the security tapes near Nancy Guthrie's house. This wasn't some random pedestrian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. We're looking at someone who deliberately wore a face covering. They made a conscious effort to hide their identity long before reaching the driveway. That specific choice to suit up prior to the approach reveals a lot. It proves the individual was fully aware of the risk of being spotted. They clearly anticipated being caught on film and moved to block any recognition, yet the preparation extended way past a simple disguise. Police reports characterized the suspect as a male identifying figure, standing at a medium stature and sporting a dark Ozark trail pack. That gear is crucial. Such a precise detail implies the subject arrived ready for action. They didn't show up empty-handed. Regardless of if they carried hardware, supplies, or specific items for the crime inside, having a bag suggests this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment visit. This person had a kit ready for the job. Then we have the intruder's actions upon reaching the main entrance. They actively messed with the smart security lens. Pause and consider the weight of that action because it is a massive red flag in this investigation. These Ring cameras are tiny gadgets. Your typical passerby wouldn't even register their presence on the wall. They stay silent and hidden against the frame, so most callers, even the unwelcome ones, just ignore them entirely. However, this guy spotted it. He either knew it existed or assumed it did and moved to disable it. He didn't just walk past or pray the lens was broken. He went straight for the hardware. This isn't how a panicked amateur behaves. This is the conduct of a person who planned around modern security. An individual who grasps that footage creates a digital trail. Someone who, well before reaching that doorstep, had weighed how to minimize the risk of being caught on tape. That kind of situational focus on a tiny sensor by the door proves a high level of premeditation and focus. It implies they either scouted the place out or simply made it a rule to kill all tech before acting. In both scenarios, the evidence leads to one conclusion. The subject was ready, but their groundwork went beyond just messing with the entrance. Detectives also noted suspicious activity at a nearby utility station, paired with a significant crash in local wireless signals during the exact window when Nancy went missing. This particular lead hasn't gotten nearly as much press as the other clues, but truthfully, it might be the most revealing tactical indicator in this whole investigation. Consider why an abductor would crash the web near their target's residence. Today's houses are packed with online gadgets, intelligent hubs, remote lenses, saving to the cloud, high-tech sensors that ping security firms or blast notifications straight to a resident's mobile device. Tools that, when active, would capture, warn, or archive every single movement happening within or outside a residence in real time. An active web link serves as an invisible yet persistent shield and record keeper for most contemporary families. By cutting that digital lifeline first, you effectively blind almost all of those safety measures. Video feeds stop syncing to servers. Emergency pings never make it out. The electronic trail of those vital moments inside the residence ends up fragmented or totally lost to investigators. Killing the connection around a specific site before a strike is never just a random coincidence or accident. A spur-of-the-moment crook wouldn't even think of this. It demands a clear understanding of what tech is inside, realizing how these gizmos operate, and seeing that a live network is a major obstacle to the mission, which leads to the manual step of sabotaging an external box to kill the signal before moving in. This represents calculated, intentional, and high-tech strategy. It brings up a massive point that police are likely debating right now. How is the perpetrator so familiar with the network setup and floor plan to pull off such a precise move? Had they scouted the block? Were they already acquainted with the layout of the victim's house? Was there an insider feeding them details about the interior setup and the home's connectivity? Since that kind of detailed groundwork doesn't happen by chance. Plus, we have the genetic evidence. Police verified they found a blend of genetic material at the site. This nuance requires a deep dive, as it's often misinterpreted by those unfamiliar with lab science. Finding a genetic cocktail doesn't imply that detectives have caught their man yet. It signifies that samples from multiple individuals were present, and technicians are currently working to untangle and name each specific profile found. Within such a tangled mystery, these blended samples represent both a major hurdle and a golden opportunity. It's a real hurdle since unweaving clustered DNA signatures demands hours of expert-level scrutiny. This is a goldmine because it proves whoever invaded that home dropped a trail. They shed bits of their own identity. Regardless of the legwork behind this hit, no matter the efforts to kill the feeds, crash the Wi-Fi, or mask their faces, human biology leaves an indelible mark inside any room. Skin, hair, fingerprints, and genetic code. This biological shedding occurs entirely beneath the suspect's own radar during the struggle. Now, forensics teams hold that evidence. They are currently running the labs. Once the results are in, those markers will either trigger a database hit or sit ready for the second a person of interest is caught and swabbed. Genetic evidence doesn't care about time, even when the clock is ticking for the detective. Then we have the getaway ride. Neighbors recalled a car flying through the streets right when Nancy was likely snatched. A vehicle tearing down a silent suburban block late into the night. It moved quickly enough to grab attention, fast enough to stick in someone's memory. When paired with the rest, this clue broadens the scope significantly. This confirms we aren't looking at a lone wolf working solely inside those four walls. Dynamics were at play. A car was involved. A concrete strategy existed to hustle Nancy off the premises the moment the first stage wrapped up. Consider the logistics needed for a lookout at the entrance, another person handling the interior, and a driver idling at a precise spot waiting for the green light to burn rubber. This wasn't some snap judgment. This wasn't a lone addict making a frantic mistake. This was a synchronized machine with various moving parts. Every player relied on the others sticking to the script, looking at the big picture, the disguise, the bag, the broken lens, the dead router, and the messed up fuse box, plus the DNA in that racing car. You aren't seeing the remnants of some random, messy outburst. You're staring at a crime constructed brick by brick, phase by phase, with cold calculation. Someone brainstormed this attack. Someone drew the blueprints. They weighed every hurdle, every lens, and every smart device, fearing detection, and then engineered a way to bypass every single one. Someone gathered their gear, shoved it into a pack, headed for a targeted home at a set time, and pulled off a script that had been practiced, at least in their head, well before the sun went down. This evidence begs a single question. Why exert all that energy for a kidnapping plot that, as Harry Trombus noted, is becoming extinct, nearly impossible to execute, and almost never ends with a payday? Why scout a house, kill the web, mess with the tech, bring pro gear, and arrange a ride, just to snatch an 84-year-old lady for cash that veterans say is impossible to pocket safely? The grind doesn't justify the prize. The prep work and the alleged goal are totally disconnected. When the homework and the motive clash like this, seasoned pros know there's a catch. It implies the public reason is a lie, It suggests those scary demand letters, despite their realism, served as a smokescreen to throw off the trail, to keep the cops and the media chasing a standard story, one that feels plausible on top, while the dark truth stays buried deep below. This is the hallmark of a high-level hit. They provide a decoy, so the truth stays hidden. If Nancy Guthrie's case followed this pattern, if the money was just a ruse, then the mystery we've been tracking since the start of this film can't be brushed aside. If cash wasn't the goal, what was? More to the point, why her? That's the game changer. Not where she went, or who took her, but specifically why her. Once you admit this was a calculated strike, that the legwork went way beyond a simple shakedown, you're facing a truth that's far more haunting than any typical kidnapping ever could be. They hunted Nancy Guthrie on purpose, not the neighbors, not some other senior down the street, not a victim of opportunity. This exact woman, in this exact spot, at this exact hour. Former FBI Special Investigator Harry Trombitas recently weighed in. He opened a new door regarding this specific case, and his revelations are absolutely critical. He suggested the motive could be revenge, pure anger, or perhaps something else entirely. A hidden goal that neither the police nor the public understands yet. Revenge, fury, or a nameless reason. Those are not the terms used for a simple robbery. Those are words for something personal that festered. It was aimed at Nancy or her inner circle with a hatred that exceeds mere financial greed. And we must also consider the words of Sheriff Nano. He noted that detectives believe they know why Nancy's home was targeted. He chose that specific word, targeted. That carries immense weight. It implies a deliberate aim. It means the culprit had Nancy in their crosshairs long before January 31st. They were not just browsing. They were not hunting for a random senior in a nice area. They came for her specifically. This means the solution is hidden within Nancy's personal history, her old ties, or her past relationship. Something existed that made someone decide an incredibly complex criminal plot was worth the risk. It was worth the disguises, the gear, cutting the cameras, killing the Wi-Fi, and the getaway car. The chilling reality is that the key to this mystery might not be in the ransom notes. It likely lives within Nancy's life story and her past connections, making this case feel uniquely different. This was no random opportunist passing by. This looks like someone who had a long-standing reason. The sheriff hinted that the police have a solid theory about the motive, they just are not talking. This leads to a massive question that is just as vital as the why. Why are they silent? Could this radio silence actually be the most brilliant tactical move they have made so far? When a case goes quiet, the public assumes one of two things. Either the trail is cold, they have run out of leads and hit a wall, leaving the public with zero updates to follow. That is the pessimistic view, and it is the one that blows up across social media platforms. Frustration usually thrives when there is a lack of news, but this silence could mean something else. Drawing on his extensive career with the Bureau, Harry Trombitas was very blunt about the situation. He explained that in high-profile cases, keeping quiet is rarely a failure, it is a calculated strategy. Grasping that distinction is the only way to truly understand the current status of Nancy's case. Think about the sheer volume of moving parts the task force is juggling right now. They are racing to find 84-year-old Nancy, whose fragile health is a major worry as time passes. They are trying to track down the kidnappers without tipping them off that the net is tightening. They have to be extremely careful to protect any forensic evidence that might be easily ruined. They cannot risk suspects destroying proof if they find out how much the authorities actually know. They are also sifting through thousands of leads. Trombitas noted every tip needs thorough vetting and paperwork. In that environment, oversharing is dangerous. Imagine if the cops leaked exactly which direction they were heading. The suspects would know where to run, they would burn bridges, wipe evidence, and coordinate their lies. If Nancy is alive, a leak could force a tragic move. In this context, silence is her protection. It is a wall built around the investigation to keep sensitive details safe from the criminals. Trombitas raised one more point that deserves some very serious thought right now. He said these mysteries often crack open because of one lone tip, not some flashy televised raid. It usually takes just one person who can no longer bear the heavy burden of a secret. People change their minds, allegiances crumble, A person who felt safe 6 weeks ago feels exposed today. Someone who stayed quiet because they were scared might finally listen to their conscience instead. It could be a bystander, not the mastermind, but someone who caught a glimpse of something suspicious. They might be reaching for their phone right now to make the one call that changes everything. That is why those signs and the cash rewards are so vital. Maintaining public interest in this mystery is crucial because the real work extends far beyond forensics labs or cold questioning rooms. A piece of the puzzle lives within the conscience of a witness who remains silent. Police understand that their own quietness isn't a lack of action. Leverage works here. Purposeful, steady pressure applied to the shadows where the facts are hiding. Each day without a leak keeps the guilty parties guessing, leaving them unsure about exactly how much evidence the detectives have actually gathered. Doubt is a weapon. That uncertainty keeps everyone looking over their shoulders. Eventually, paranoid individuals slip up. They might vent to a snitch or make a suspicious move that catches a watchful eye. A single bad choice leaves a breadcrumb. Trump has emphasized that just because the media is quiet doesn't mean the gears aren't grinding. Lab work is slow. Genetic testing is tedious. Scouring miles of security tape is a grind. Checking out every single lead takes forever. All this grinding happens behind the scenes. None of these grueling hours make the evening news while they are in progress. Yet every small step constructs a foundation. Occasionally, it builds a solid prosecution that is ironclad the moment it finally goes public. It is also worth noting how the task force persists in re-examining digital recordings and clues even when the initial sweep of the items didn't turn up any red flags right away. That level of relentless detail-oriented effort, pushing forward when the leads seem dead, isn't how a team acts when they are ready to throw in the towel. These actions prove the squad knows the truth is buried in the files and they are dead set on dragging it out. So whenever the department goes radio silent, or when the chief hints at a reason for the crime without spilling the details, or you see insiders being incredibly tight-lipped, do not mistake that for being stuck. See it as tactical restraint. View it as the calculated calm of veterans who are so close to a break that one loose lip could ruin everything. The hush surrounding the Nancy Guthrie disappearance isn't a sign of failure. It is the sound of a storm about to break. Yet, before that happens, another factor is in play. This element doesn't exist in a squad room or a police station. It lives on side streets and signs, hitting a commuter who sees a photo and recalls a detail they once thought was trivial. That power is the community, and their involvement in the next phase might be more vital than people realize. In specific probes, the file leaves the station and enters the daily lives of regular citizens. It is no longer just a headline you read while relaxing on your couch. You might actually hold a piece of the story. The big break might not come from a test tube or a precinct. Instead, it comes from someone idling at a stoplight, staring at a poster, and suddenly connecting the dots in their mind. That is the current state of Nancy Guthrie's mystery. Nancy's portrait is plastered on signs way beyond Tucson or Arizona, reaching across state lines, positioned in busy hubs where tens of thousands of commuters drive by every 24 hours. Her photo, showing an 84-year-old grandmother of deep conviction, carries a desperate plea to the public. Do you recognize her? Any leads? Reach out. The relatives have upped the bounty for Nancy's safe recovery to $1 million. $1 million. That is not just some empty promise. It is a massive financial stake intended to broadcast one clear point to anyone holding secrets about Nancy Guthrie. No matter how terrifying it feels to speak up, her kin will ensure it is worth your while. Plus, the federal authorities have chipped in another $100,000. In total, $1.1 million is waiting for whoever provides the tip that solves this crime. Listen, many folks see those figures and only think about the cash. However, Harry Trumbutus, the ex-federal official following this drama, knows that a bounty works on a psychological level. It is a beacon. It alerts those lingering on the fringes. Individuals who have some dirt but are currently sitting on the fence. It proves the heat is on, the consequences are heavy, and the chance to cooperate won't last until the end of time. Imagine that witness, they likely weren't the one who actually laid hands on Nancy Guthrie. The main culprit is probably off the grid or vowed to never talk, yet intricate offenses involving logistics, seamless logistics, and complex planning leave a trail that others are bound to notice. Schemes this intricate never stay completely secret. A witness definitely heard something early on. It might have been subtle or seemed like insignificant small talk at the time. Nevertheless, some words were definitely exchanged between certain parties. A specific name was dropped, a plan mentioned, or a grudge aired. A friend likely spotted a shift in a companion's typical mood or behavior. An odd inquiry was made that didn't spark concern until much later. A bystander observed something leading up to January 31st that carries a far darker meaning today than it did back then. That individual might be totally oblivious to the value of their memory. They hold a vital clue without even realizing it is a piece of the puzzle. Perhaps they dismissed it as just a weird encounter or a random odd chat, an awkward vibe that didn't warrant a call. Now that secret lingers within them while they live their daily life disconnected from the bigger picture. Massive signs, cash incentives, and constant news cycles. These efforts target that specific witness to help them connect the dots, to keep Nancy's image front and center until a sudden realization hits them during a normal day. The light bulb finally goes off and they think, wait, that's what it was. Then they reach for their phone. Trump has addressed this exact situation while explaining how allegiances shift during a felony investigation. His insight was grounded in human nature. Personal ties eventually evolve or wither away. The initial silence, fueled by affection, terror, or a sense of duty or greed, starts to crumble after 6 weeks, 6 months, or even a full year. Anxiety dissipates. Devotion sours under the weight of remorse. Loyalty vanishes when a friend puts your own safety in jeopardy. Personal gain gets reevaluated as the bounty grows, and the risks of staying quiet become terrifyingly obvious. Someone who hesitated on February 1st might decide to talk by March 19th. A witness who once felt safe and sure of themselves might be feeling incredibly vulnerable and anxious today. The clock isn't just ticking against Nancy. It also pressures those hiding the truth. Those roadside displays serve as a relentless warning of that reality. Each time they pass her portrait, whether cruising through Arizona or across the country, they see that the public hasn't forgotten, the police are still digging, and the money is still there. They are forced to face the heavy burden of their daily decision and its fallout. It still matters. And the final chapter hasn't been written yet. Beyond just spreading the word, these signs send a message that many people often overlook. It tells the culprits that the authorities haven't limited their search to just a few local suspects by plastering Nancy's face all over different regions. Her relatives and the cops are signaling that the net is broad and no single location is safe. Every lead is being chased. That kind of high-profile, persistent heat messes with a guilty person's head. There is no sanctuary far enough away. You can't cross a border to escape the reach of this story. You never get that feeling of relief that the heat has finally died down. Those eyes on the road haunt you. Meanwhile, the nonstop press reports do the exact same thing. Every television special or breaking news update keeps her name alive until the perfect witness hears it. Trumpist was very clear about this specific strategy. Often, a single, fresh detail or a recent broadcast finally convinces someone to dial that number and break the case. It's not always about new facts, but about reaching a person just as they find the courage to talk. Success depends on timing, and the organizers know they can't force a witness to come forward. They can, however, ensure that when that person is finally ready, the clues are ready, her face is everywhere, the tip line is clear, and the payout is life-changing. When you spot those signs or read about the growing bounty and see Nancy's story still making headlines months later, know that every bit of it is intentional. It's a calculated, long-term plan, a focused approach based on a core truth that veteran detectives rely on during these grim investigations. Out in the world, a person holds a secret. While they have stayed silent so far, that could change. Once they speak, the whole landscape shifts. We are not doubting if this individual actually exists. Judging by insights from detectives and ex-agents on this file, they almost certainly do. The real trick is finding their price. Which specific blend of timing, stress, exposure, cash, remorse, or terror, and basic morality will eventually nudge them to trade their silence for the fact? Nancy Guthrie's kin are wagering $1 million that a solution exists. Meanwhile, police, backed by bounties and relentless digging, are risking something far more precious than cash. They are gambling on the idea that facts in these mysteries simply refuse to remain hidden eternally. Success just requires the perfect timing and a witness brave enough to finally spill the beans. Eventually, during any disappearance probe, regardless of how much you have drowned in the data, despite meticulously dissecting the intentions, the prep work, and the tactical approach, you must pause to recall a core truth. We are not solving a game, we are finding a human. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie has a household that truly cherishes her. Her local congregation flagged her absence right away since she was known for never missing a service. Her existence is rich with memories and bonds that have nothing to do with the tragedy that turned her name into a national headline. Someone calls her mom, others call her grandma or friend, yet she has been gone for several weeks. Addressing Nancy's plight, Harry Trumbitis did not hide the grim facts regarding how her advanced years affect a long-term search. He spoke with the bluntness only a veteran investigator possesses, knowing that offering fake optimism is actually quite cruel. It is its own form of malice. He admitted the odds of locating Nancy breathing have dwindled since those initial moments after she vanished. Processing that thought is brutal. It hits much harder when you visualize a real person, a unique identity, or an 84-year-old lady instead of some nameless data point in a police report. Each sunset makes the situation significantly more critical than it was the previous morning. Given her age, Nancy's physical constitution lacks the deep stamina a youthful individual would rely on during a terrifying ordeal. The immense pressure of her current environment, regardless of the setting, puts a strain on her frame that would break even much younger victims. The mix of her years, anxiety, missing meds, and ticking clocks paints a picture that cops and relatives, plus the public, simply cannot overlook. Nevertheless, authorities keep hunting as if Nancy is still out there. This is not trivial. It is a calculated, persistent, and vital professional stance taken by the lead detectives. They still have not started referring to her in the past tense. They have not adopted that tone cops use for casualties when their internal findings clash with what they tell the cameras. Officers are currently hunting for clues, digging through forensic data, watching tapes, and logging every single phone tip, operating under the assumption that a live rescue is still on the table. That attitude says everything. Seasoned pros do not keep up that level of intensity just to be nice or emotional. They persist because the other option, fearing the worst and letting that doubt slow down the clock, is incredibly risky. If Nancy is still breathing, even a tiny drop in effort might mean the difference between a recovery and a tragedy. A true professional would never gamble with those stakes. Thus, the hunt remains at maximum intensity, and current updates show that detectives are still meticulously re-examining video and physical clues even when those items did not suggest any foul play during the initial review. This point matters since it highlights the grit of a team that keeps checking files that have not yielded a smoking gun yet. By scrubbing through the same tapes over and over, you are proving you believe the smoking gun is hidden right under your nose. A clue skipped during the first glance could pop out during the next review. Being steady and thorough with the current file often produces breakthroughs that rushing would totally overlook. This is not a dead-end probe. It is a masterclass in professional focus and rigor. However, you cannot decouple the cold hard facts from the heartbreak. And here is the emotional truth. Somewhere, Nancy's relatives are starting their day and facing a burden that is incredibly hard to carry. They're balancing a pair of conflicting emotions that just won't settle: optimism and dread. Faith lingers since the detectives are grinding, because the payout is huge, since posters are hitting the streets, since an ex-Fed keeps discussing the file through clues and breadcrumbs and the chance for a crack, while the cops are still on the clock. Because out in the world, that silent witness might finally choose this very moment to speak up. Then there's terror as weeks vanish. since Nancy is 84. Since the quiet from her unknown location, assuming she's breathing, feels crushing and thick and totally cryptic to everyone involved. Since every dawn breaking without an update marks another sunrise, the relatives endure using nothing but pure belief and a gritty will to stay strong. That mix of light and dark existing together, neither force capable of drowning out the other, remains among the most draining and painful spots a person can ever inhabit. Now, the Guthrie kin have stayed trapped there for weeks. They've played every card perfectly. They've helped the detectives. They've gathered a massive cash pile. They've faced the cameras to keep the search trending. They've stood by as a narrative that looked basic at first, morphed into a web much more tangled and scary than just a basic pay-to-play scheme. Throughout this ordeal, they've plastered Nancy's image everywhere. They've fought to ensure she isn't just a number in a file, another unsolved mystery, or a headline that vanishes as the media moves on to the next big tragedy. Nancy Guthrie remains gone, yet her loved ones keep swinging for her every waking hour. We must also recognize the local impact here. Take the Catalina Foothills area, her old home, her parish family, and the whole Tucson region following this drama. These folks aren't just bystanders. They're neighbors who loved her or knew her name, feeling their own echoes of the anxiety and prayer her kin feel tenfold. A town that sees a resident snatched in a violent strike won't just move on while that soul is still out in the cold. A tear exists in the local social cloth that won't mend until the truth comes out. That gash stays raw and won't heal until Nancy is located, until the culprits are caught and squeezed for answers. And the reality of that January 31st night, 2026, is fully exposed. One final thought on faith during these crises: mysteries crack open. Occasionally, it's a crawl. Other times, it's a flash, often following grueling lab tests that finally yield a hit. Or it could be one tip from someone whose guilt has been eating them alive until they finally just had to let it out. Harry Trombus knows the drill. He's seen dead-end files catch fire because of a random detail nobody saw coming. He's witnessed those times when long, quiet, hidden labor yields a win that appears magical to the public, yet was really the logical result of every small step taken. We aren't there yet with Nancy Guthrie, but the engine driving that breakthrough is humming inside crime labs right now, across hotline desks, and through the steady, tireless focus of cops who refuse to quit. It lives in the head of a witness holding back, and in the spirits of kin who won't stop praying she'll walk through the door. The expectation is heavy, the terror is sharp, and the mystery wedged in the middle, the one growing through every chapter of this saga, through every scrap of proof and every measured sentence from ex-feds and local lawmen, is the pivot point for everything. Not just their goal, but specifically why her. And if the truth, once it finally emerges, will be the key to her return. We started with a basic setup. An 84-year-old lady disappears. Demands for cash show up. Millions in green are requested. And everyone, quite naturally, and almost without thinking, well, bought into a classic motive. It was a cash grab, a crime of chance. A predator took a shot fueled by avarice. That's what most folks assumed for a month. But check out the current situation. Notice how the narrative has shifted. A veteran Fed, a guy who lived and breathed these profile types, argues the kidnapping for cash theory is losing steam hourly. It's not ruled out, but it's shrinking, dying, and getting tougher to align with the facts. The sequence of events and the actual mechanics of modern abductions in America circa 2026. Lead investigator states his unit feels they've pinpointed why Nancy's residence was singled out, not just a random stop, but a deliberate strike. He has intentionally and cautiously opted to withhold that specific information from the general public. This isn't for lack of information, but because keeping it under wraps is crucial for the case. The clues suggest a highly organized operation involving a felony meticulously mapped out by an individual who weighed every factor from digital footprints and web access to timing and getaways. A person arriving prepared. Who cut the feeds? And who arrived at that exact property on that particular evening with a clear-cut objective that was anything but accidental? And the driving force, at least according to seasoned analysts following the trail, might have nothing to do with a payday. It could be about settling a score. It might be pure vitriol. It could be a factor that hasn't even been mentioned yet. Something intimate and pointed. A link to Nancy's personal history that those fabricated ransom letters were intended to bury completely. That's the current state of the mystery. It's no longer a straightforward tale of someone wanting a quick buck. There's something much colder and more intentional here. A crime that, under closer inspection, looks like it was never about its outward appearance. The dawning realization that the narrative the world was sold from day one might actually be a carefully crafted smokescreen rather than reality is the most chilling part, because it implies the culprit actually considered us. They considered how the story played. They predicted the conclusion that nearly everyone would reach and constructed a lie intended to steer you right toward it. They invented a motive that felt grounded and plausible just to push our collective attention toward a path that benefited their agenda. That doesn't sound like the frantic moves of a panicked criminal. That sounds like someone cold enough to script not only the act itself, but the way the world would interpret it. And buried beneath that artificial narrative, underneath the fake demands and the version of the night they wanted us to believe, lies the actual sequence of events. The truth that authorities apparently have a handle on already. The truth that the sheriff is keeping locked away for now. The one that clarifies not just the events of January 31st, but why Nancy Guthrie was the one in the crosshairs. Why that specific home? Why that woman? Why was all that meticulous legwork and coordination deemed necessary for this one target? That authentic account remains untold, not in the headlines and not in full, at least not in a way that brings Nancy's relatives the closure they deserve or gives the world the reality it's been searching for. Yet it exists. It's tucked away within the files, known to those deep inside the room, just waiting for the right moment to surface. Once the proof is ironclad and the case is bulletproof, then the truth will finally step out from the dark corners where it's lived since winter. Nancy Guthrie remains missing as of tonight. She is 84 years old. She has kin who adore her, a town that remembers her, and detectives who refuse to quit the hunt. Not a random victim, not a crime of opportunity, a deliberate strike against this specific woman in this specific house for a reason the sheriff refuses to name publicly. The evidence backs this up. A masked intruder, a packed gear bag, a disabled doorbell camera, and a deliberate Wi-Fi blackout timed to the abduction. DNA from multiple individuals was recovered at the scene. A speeding getaway car was spotted. This was not a panicked amateur. This was a coordinated team with a plan. When a crime is too organized for its stated motive, the motive is usually a lie built to send everyone chasing the wrong story. Those ransom letters may have been a smokescreen, a decoy designed to keep investigators focused on money while the real reason stayed buried. The sheriff knows the why. The FBI veteran suspects it is personal, revenge, anger, or something tied directly to Nancy Guthrie's own history and relationships. Nancy is 84 years old. Every day without answers makes her situation more critical. Time is not on her side, and the people who took her know that. If you know anything about Nancy Guthrie or her disappearance, contact the Pima County Sheriff or the federal tip line. A reward of over $1 million is unclaimed. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss an update on Nancy Guthrie or any case where the official story stops making sense. The truth is always worth chasing. For 50 days, an 84-year-old grandmother has been missing, and the story everyone believed from day one might be completely wrong. Nancy Guthrie, mother of Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie, vanished from her Tucson home on January 31st, 2026. She spent that last evening with family, said her goodbyes, walked inside her house, and was never seen again. The next morning, when she failed to appear at her church, friends immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Ransom letters arrived demanding millions of dollars, and the public quickly settled on one explanation: someone grabbed her for cash. It felt logical. A wealthy senior in an upscale neighborhood, million-dollar demands, a crime driven by pure greed. Almost everyone bought it. But a veteran FBI special agent named Harry Trombitas is now saying the ransom theory is looking less and less likely with every passing day. He points out that kidnapping for profit cases are incredibly rare in modern America, extremely difficult to pull off, and almost never result in a successful payday. Then the Pima County Sheriff dropped a bombshell. His team believes they already know exactly why Nancy Guthrie's home was specifically targeted.